have any opening remarks before we move into a discussion of the status of the membership of this group?
Good morning, Director Buchowski. Looking forward to beginning our work in the Best Management Practice Advisory Committee. We have some, as you mentioned, some administration here on the front side to go through, and I wanted to mention to any of the potential members of the committee or anyone who in the audience who is absolutely desired in their opinions and voices all through this meeting. It'll be interesting to see how this format works virtually. It works pretty well in an open meeting room, but certainly going to encourage during the technical discussions of this meeting that questions be asked even as we are in the middle of discussing items. This is a time for everybody that's interested into this to get their questions answered as best as possible, and to get into this technical aspects, because we're going to have a good feeling and knowledge of these things to be able to go forward in our recommendations at the backside. So thank you very much, and I'll get out of it until we get our various administrative duties done.
Thanks, Scott, and I'll just say, Scott, you as the chair, I would ask folks when they raise their hand in the chat or however that will work virtually, that they go through you, Scott, as the chair to help guide and make sure that process goes smoothly. Everyone gets a chance to speak about the issues. So I think that will work well for us. So we're going to have the next slide that shows the agenda. Again, we're in the introduction phase. We want to talk about the status of the membership of this group. And then we'll talk about some of the background related to this group regarding the management plans, the statutory requirements for the BMP program, where we were at with the 4th management plan and are moving forward on the 5th management plan. And you can see the rest of the agenda. I won't go through it line by line. And we did develop this agenda with the chair, with Scott. So everyone should be aware of that. And I will move on now then to the discussion of the status of the membership, and I'm going to ask Carol Ward on my staff to go through that discussion, unless, Scott, you would prefer to do that?
No, I think it would be fine to do it the way you just mentioned.
All right, thank you. So, Carol, can you do that for us, please?
Certainly. We could advance a slide, please. Okay, good morning, everyone. We covered some of this at the last meeting, but I'll just recap briefly. We have a number of existing members in the committee. The executive order assigns the director of the Department of Water Resources and the director of the Department of Agriculture to this committee. Director Buchowski and Director Killian are obviously on board with this already. Another appointed position from the outset is from the USDA Arid Land Ag Research Center. That's Dr. Kevin Bronson. We appreciate his participation. Obviously, our chair is continuing to serve on this committee, which we very much appreciate. Thank you, Scott. Brian Hartman is continuing to serve on the committee as well. If you could move forward a slide, please. But we do have a number of open seats. Ron Wong has declined to continue to serve on the committee, but he has made a recommendation for a member of his operation to apply. We have a number of open seats. SRP is one of the appointed seats. We're not quite sure yet if Dave Roberts will be serving in that seat or someone else from SRP. We should know that pretty soon. But you'll see we have a number of open seats, an agricultural producer from any AMA, and 3 irrigation districts. And we also have an open seat for a municipal representative We have, boards and commissions have received a number of applications so far. We encourage anybody who would like to participate in the committee to apply online through boards and commissions as soon as possible so that they may begin reviewing the application and forward that information to the governor so that he may appoint committee members. This can take some time. Boards and commissions has a great deal of work on their plate. We will try to expedite this as quickly as we can because the work of this group needs to be occurring immediately. The fact that we don't have members all seated just yet is not going to keep us from the work that we have at hand, but we will need to get that finalized as soon as possible. So if you're interested in applying and want more information, please contact Scott or any of us here at the department and we'll help you with that. If anybody has questions regarding the committee membership, I'd be happy to take those.
So hearing no questions, I just wanted to add a couple of things to this discussion. When we work with the Ag Collaborator Group to ask the governor to reestablish and continue the BMP Advisory Committee, we did talk about what would be the most effective membership for these open slots. I'm aware that in the Tucson AMA, where BKW Farms is located, there really aren't BMP farms, but because this program is available in that AMA as well as the other AMAs, I am very supportive of continuing to have a representative from the Tucson AMA and agriculture representative from the Tucson AMA. For the irrigation districts, we had Roosevelt Irrigation District on there historically. I'd like to see kind of that continue. Talked about some other possible folks from the other two irrigation districts in the Pinal AMA, and hopefully those folks have applied to the governor's boards and commissions. We'll reach out to Dave Roberts at SRP to either get Dave to apply or Dave's preferred choice to actually apply, because I don't think Dave has applied yet. And then historically, the municipal representative was Bob McCain from AMWA. Bob had a history of working on the original groundwater code and a long history lobbying down at the state legislature on behalf of AMWA. Municipal slot is still a little bit open. I was hoping perhaps a municipality representative from Pinal AMA might end up in that slot. I know we have interest from Queen Creek, for example. So hopefully all those folks have applied. We will continue, Scott, to work with you on the progress of getting those slots filled, and any feedback, Scott, we get from the governor's office, boards and commissions on where they're going and who they might be choosing of the applicants that are applying for these positions. But we are looking for the right balance. We're looking for folks clearly that have some history, if there are some folks out there that are applying, and wanting to make this a really effective and well represented across all the AMAs, kind of an advisory group. So with that, if there's no other questions or comments, I'll pause a second just in case there are.
Director, I do see a couple of questions and comments here for you and Chairman Riggins. Representative Andrea D'Alessandro has commented, I serve on Natural Resources, Energy and Water and the Land, Agriculture and Rural Affairs House Committees. I will be in and out of this meetings because of other meetings, including Tribal Day. She has included her email there in the chat box for reference. Shane Leonard has commented, do you mean Donovan Neese with RID or someone from my organization at RWCD director?
So hopefully when I spoke, I said RID and not RWCD. And again, that's because historically, I think it was Stan Ashby, if I have the name right. Yeah. That was on there for years and years and years on behalf of RID. And I think there's value in kind of that continuing in my mind. But again, we're not sure how all the slots will fill out from the viewpoint of the governor's boards and commissions, Shane. So if you desire to apply, I would not discourage you from doing so, because I can't, the decision is not mine to be made at the end of the day. It is the governor's office that's going to make that final decision.
Thank you, Director. Nothing further in the chat box.
All right, thank you. We'll move on then to the next agenda item, and I'm going to ask Natalie to talk about the status of the management plan, statutory requirements for the BMP program, some background there, a fourth management plan update to the BMP program that we've already adopted, and then the timeline and generally proposals for the fifth management plan. And that timeline for the fifth management plan is critical. It's going to be tight, and we need to have the fifth management plan done by the end of this year. So Natalie, go ahead.
Thank you, Director. As Director Bushatsky said, my name is Natalie Mast. I am the AMA Director responsible for the management plans here at ADWR. I'm going to go through, as Tom said, some status on the management plans, some thoughts on how the committee might best coordinate the upcoming sequence of topics with the fifth management plan's timeline. Next slide, please. Thank you. So back in the middle of 2019, we did initiate a renewed public focus on the management plans. And we set goals of adopting the fourth management plans by the end of 2020 and having the fifth management plans effective by 2025. So as of the end of 2020, as of last month, we did achieve our goal of completing the adoptions of the Phoenix, Pinal, and Santa Cruz AMA fourth management plans by the end of 2020. So the conservation programs for each of those plans will become effective on January 1st, 2023. In order to have the fifth management plans effective on January 1st, 2025, those plans must be adopted by the end of 2022. Next slide, please. Thank you. So originally, we had intended to complete the development process for the fifth management plans by the end of 2020. Obviously, we did not meet that target, but we do want to make sure that we are continuing these discussions to get the feedback and the buy-in we need from the regulated community. We will be spending much of this year, much of 2021, drafting all 5 fifth management plans, but we'll be sequencing that drafting process in a way that allows some of these discussions to continue, both in the fifth management plans work group and in this committee over the next several months. Next slide, please. So for a little bit of background here, this slide shows just a very, very high-level summary of how the BMP program has changed over time. The agricultural BMP program was established under a modification to the third management plans with a target of achieving 10 points in order to be in compliance with that program. Under the Phoenix, Pinal, and Santa Cruz fourth management plans that were adopted last year, we did update that points target from 10 to 12 points and adjusted how some of those points were distributed within each BMP category. For the fifth management plans, we've been having a lot of discussions in our fifth management plans work group, in our agricultural subgroup, of how we might modify the fifth management plans, the BMP program for the fifth management plans. A points target has not yet been proposed for the fifth management plans, but a proposal was introduced that there could be tiers for that, for those points targets, perhaps based on total water use or acre foot per acre usage, or perhaps simply acreage of a given farm. So under that proposal, larger farms are those that are more intensive users of water, depending on how those tiers were structured, would be required to achieve a higher points total.
So I just want to jump in before Natalie moves to the next slide. For purposes of full disclosure, and I think we talked about this before, but there was some uneasiness, even at the end of the day, with the ag community about our fourth management plan actions and requirements for the Pinal active management area plan. We did agree that this BMP advisory group could look at the whole program from the bottom up, that the fifth management plan, from DBR's perspective, would not automatically be an add-on to the fourth management plan. So just wanted to reiterate our commitment to being open to discussing all of it from the ground up, and I think it was critical to the acceptance. Maybe some of it was tacit and some of it was expressed, support or comfort level with the adoption of the fourth management plans for the Pinal and Santa Cruz AMAs. So I'll turn it back to Natalie.
Sure. So as Tom kind of indicated, there certainly will be continued development of this proposal or alternative proposals in this committee, and eventually those discussions would be sent back from this committee with potential recommendations to the fifth management plan's agricultural subgroup. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the idea behind these changes in the fourth and fifth management plans was twofold. First, to meet our statutory requirements to reduce withdrawals of groundwater in successive management plans, and second, to create a more cohesive structure for how the program options for the agricultural conservation programs fit together. There were a lot of driving forces behind the creation of the BMP program, but one of those driving forces was the administrative burden on those farming multiple IGFRs. So the integrated farm program could occupy kind of a middle ground here between the base and BMP programs by allowing farms to combine under a single reporting umbrella. It could address many of those administrative burden concerns, but with the simplicity of an allotment program and without the specificity of complying with and reporting on individual BMPs. That proposal will continue to be discussed in those fifth management plan work group meetings while this committee focuses on the BMP program. With that middle ground alternative, though, this could allow for a strengthening of the conservation and the credibility of the BMP program. Farms using the best conservation and efficiency infrastructure and management practices and focusing water use on the best and most productive pieces of land. Next slide, please. So how can we get to having those conversations about the BMP program for the fifth management plans? We showed this slide here at the last committee meeting, and you can see that there are a lot of moving pieces here. And from the timeline I went through earlier, you can see that there's not a lot of time to cover the ground that we would need to cover here. Next slide, please. So we've laid out a possible work plan and timeline here. This is definitely draft. This is kind of a potential proposal for how these topics might be sequenced in this committee in order to ensure that the committee properly coordinates its feedback to coordinate with the timeline for the fifth management plans. The important thing to note here is that there really is not a lot of buffer here. Perhaps this is a situation where it would be helpful for some subset of members to take on specific issues and report back to the larger group. in order to move things along more quickly. The sequence laid out here would be working toward the group providing recommendations to Director Bishofsky at the beginning of May in order to allow time for those recommendations to be taken back to that 5th Management Plans work group, and also allow time for the director and ADWR staff to consider whether and how to incorporate those recommendations into the draft 5th Management Plans. Our intent is to continue work group meetings through the drafting process on an as-needed basis to allow review of that program language as the details of each program are actually put down on paper over the course of 2021. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Director Bishofsky.
I just want to add one additional thing to clarify how this might move forward. So this committee's work and the committee of the Ag stakeholder group, the bigger group, needs to have a finite time frame in terms of the back and forth with specific proposals we're talking about. And I kind of see that as phase 1 of the public outreach process. That would allow us then to draft the regulatory section for agriculture that will show up in the 5th management plans in a way that we can, in phase 2 of the stakeholder outreach, both with this group and with the larger group of ag stakeholders, have some specific discussion about that draft, because I think it always matters to the regulated community, as it should, what the actual words on the actual piece of paper say at the end of the day, to get people either comfortable or to focus their feedback. And so I just wanted to make that point, that we're going to see this as in kind of 2 phases. There might be a little hiatus in between kind of the finalization of the discussion back and forth about the elements and the actual drafting of that regulatory section for phase 2 of the public outreach and review. So just wanted to make that a little bit more clear about what we intend to do. And certainly we can stop here on that item or any of the things that Natalie has talked about so far before we move on to the next item, to give people a chance to comment or ask questions. And Scott, I guess I'll start with you, not to put you on the spot. If you don't have anything, then we'll open it up to everybody.
Thank you, Director Bishofsky. The only thing that I would like to state before everybody has some comments, before we get into the rest of the agenda, is I would like to sincerely thank you for the comment you made concerning the discussions we had to get to a point to where we could agree to have a final on the 4th management period and continue to look at the entire program as we go through these fact-finding and deliberation times. Very much appreciate you mentioned it at this point, and did very much appreciate the way that you worked with that while we were going through it. And other than that, if there's any questions, I'd prefer them to go until before I get into any technical aspects of the program.
Call for questions, Natalie.
Thank you, Chairman Riggins and Director. There are no questions or comments in the chat box.
Well then, Director Bishofsky, does that put me on the agenda then?
So I think Natalie might have no more. Natalie's done? Yes. That puts you on the agenda for item 3, review of BMP worksheet and individual BMPs.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. This will be new to me on a video format of trying to bring in as much input as possible, potentially during the discussion. So potentially important questions don't wait until after a long bit of narration. I have my chat box opened to where I will see things come on as they are in real time. And if someone would like to be recognized as we're discussing, I would like try that as the way we do it going forward. We'll see how that works. As I say, this is, in chairing meetings, this is a bit of a new concept to me, and we'll see how it flows. On our agenda, overview of the BMP worksheets and individual BMPs. Individual BMPs, there are 4 different categories there: technical accuracy, improvement, point values, and potential new BMPs. I intend to handle those 4 points wrapped into a single discussion, because I think the best format to use is to go down the actual approved BMP sheets as they are and discuss why they were done the way they were done, the changes that were made for the 4th management plan, some of the places where potential disagreement exists, and some of the places I think no disagreement exists. So I'm going to begin with the 3rd management plan BMP worksheet, and I'm going to be comparing it as I go to the 4th BMP worksheet. The concept in the 4th management plan of changing point systems from 10 to 12 required, and then changing individual BMP points, in my opinion, and I think many in the ag community, don't really see a problem with that. Provided that the point rankings, to get to that, the increased point rankings possible per category to get to a higher number, provided those individual points match the desire and the reality of reaching greater conservation. So I think, unless anybody in the ag community wants to hold their hand up and say, I don't believe that there is really any dissension or disagreement over a change in the point numbers for the overall program, provided again that we have to talk about how the individual points work into that. And I don't see anybody in chat, so evidently that is something that is agreed. The first category of the BMP program deals with the necessity of having line conveyance systems. This concept is a basic concept of irrigation conservation. Unlined systems lose an enormous amount of water, no benefit whatsoever. And everyone from the beginning, this was one of the most simple concepts to get an agreement on, is lined and using a concept of the percentage of a farm unit, how it got its points through the percentage of the farm unit that was lined. This changed. We went to 12 points from 10. This category went from 3 points to a possible of 4. And as far as I know, as far as anybody I've talked to, there isn't a soul that had a problem with that. And again, I won't elaborate further if there's no need to. So I'll just wait a moment and see if anything comes on chat where anybody wishes to discuss that.
Chairman Riggins, no comments or questions in the chat box.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, at this point then, we'll move on to category number 2, which is farm irrigation systems. In the 3rd management plan, this was the debate. The 3rd management plan, the disagreements, the agreements, the differing opinions, they vested themselves here more than anywhere else. Again, in this category, provided that the relative merits of various conservation systems were reflected carefully, I don't think anyone has a problem of moving from a 3-point total in this category to a 4-point total that reflects on a 12-point necessary total. I don't think that is a problem. However, this is where probably at this point, one of the larger disagreements going forward occurs with the regulated community and the department. One thing that I think is important to point out on the original third management BMP worksheet is that we have a large number of very inefficient systems indicated here. Somebody that doesn't quite understand the dynamics of how this works might ask, why are those even there? Well, the reason they are there is that, first of all, this category, unlike the other categories, when it was 3 points, unless 2 points were made in this category, you couldn't be in the BMP. So if the structural farm irrigation systems on your farm wouldn't count up to 2 points, no need apply. You can't get in because your level of conservation is not high enough. Now, the reason that we have systems that are less than 2 points listed is because there are times that there might be a farm that, let's just say, for point of example, let's say there's a farm with 20 field units in it, and potentially the majority of those units has 3 points. But then 1 or 2 field units maybe only had 1 point. Well, by having all those different scores as a percentage, that very efficient farm would still be in the BMP program, even though it had a unit or 2 that didn't make it, that wasn't efficient enough. Oftentimes, in a limited water situation, which is, I believe, an absolute definition of the Pinell AMA, in a farm unit, there is sometimes only so much water to go around, and if a field unit exists in a very steep or poor soil area, and there's only so much water to go around, sometimes those fields just stay fallow pretty much forever or a very long time. So the reason we have the low points on the top side is just to reflect the concept of a farm might be very efficient, make this program perfectly, but it may have a field unit or 2 that doesn't make it, isn't lessening the amount of conservation on the farm, because almost assuredly those are not being irrigated because of a limited water supply. This is the reason why we have those on top. Now, as we work down into the various point systems, where things started being debated in the third management plan were basically the last 4 columns, the last 4 lines, I should say, 2.7, 2.8, 2.9, and 2.10. That's where there was discussion and it abounded. To get into those discussions at that time, I'll try to make it just as an illumination of what they are, and not try to take the discussion out, but just to know why they are going to be needed to be discussed by this committee. The first one, near level systems. Near level systems was stuck in because in the beginning, there wasn't even a recognition that something could slightly not be the same as what a level system definition is, and yet not be very, very efficient. The original concepts of flat for level systems, those definitions, with the passing of a decade and a half, it's been realized, and there were people that realized it at the time, that certain soils and certain distances sometimes can actually be made less efficient if they are nearly flat. Now, you don't want a lot of slope in it, but you want some. You actually will get more uniformity, and you will get more water efficiency and greater conservation. This was an initial attempt to recognize that concept. I believe personally that it needs to be rediscussed. I believe its definition needs to be thought of by this committee. The next line, line 2.8, level systems, that's a simple concept. It's a virtually flat field. Again, the definition on that is one that many people believed was problematic, in that the system was defined not by the slope per 100 feet, which is the way any irrigation efficiency is calculated, but it was defined by the slope of an entire field. Well, the problem in this is obviously if you have an 1/8 of a mile field and you have a 1/4 mile field, the same slopes enter totally different irrigation fall over the entire field. And this is something that really is not beneficial. That definition, it served us, but I believe that this definition needs to be revisited. I believe that level systems need to be defined as a given slope, regardless of what the fall of the field is. There are times in short fields where they actually need fall to function. And there are times in longer fields where they definitely need more fall to function. Other times, dead flat on a short field can be reasonable, but it almost always is better if it has a 100th or 200th fall to make the water move more effectively over the distance, because there is drag and you do have overpenetration if you spend too long moving across, particularly in a situation where you don't have enormous volumes of water to help alleviate that problem. By pushing across an enormous volume, you can get across faster and get more uniform penetration. However, as I think everybody that's sitting in on this meeting knows, that here in just a few years, the very large designed 15 CFS heads that have been available in the CAP districts will be no more. So one of the things that was a part of this was the availability of very large head sizes. So it is something I believe we're definitely going to want to look at in light of knowledge gained over the last 15 years and a difference in our irrigation volumes that all the CAP districts are expecting. Moving on to BMP 2.9, low pressure sprinkler systems. There were issues when this first was done. You'll notice in the third management plan, level systems, low pressure sprinkler systems, and trickle irrigation systems all got the same point value. And that was by design. One of the things that didn't happen, it was brought up a great deal at the time, but it didn't carry the day, and I do believe we're going to need to speak about it seriously. All of the high conservation efficiency systems not only require installation, and they not only require management, but they also require maintenance. And all those are part of the conservation equation. In low pressure sprinkler systems, there was never any concepts given to what kind of slope was underneath a low pressure sprinkler system. A low pressure sprinkler system on a field with a great deal of fall in any direction certainly isn't anywhere near as efficient as a level basin flood irrigation system, because the water runs off just like it does in flood irrigation. There was any designation whatsoever about knowing what the ground was underneath it. So a high ranking just because it's low pressure sprinkler system really is just wrong. It's incorrect. It's technically incorrect. It survived in the third management plan. I think we need to discuss it and see where we go with it at this point. Another issue with a low pressure sprinkler system is it is a machine. And any machine that operates over time wears. There are various concepts in sprinklers, orifices, drive mechanisms, that when they operate at less than perfect concepts, the efficiency falls off greatly. And we have nothing in any of our categories to reflect how that maintenance needs to be quantified and how it needs to be done. I believe that's another point that we need to discuss. On BMP 2.1 or 2.10, trickle irrigation systems. Again, originally this was given 3 points. And trickle systems, in theory, can be very efficient. However, I believe many people have used them over the years, and I believe in the field trip the department took out into the Timel AMA several weeks ago, a couple months ago. I believe they saw that there are a lot of aspects of trickle irrigation systems that defeat their purported efficiency to a great deal. One of the aspects that has always been there is gopher problems. Gopher problems can play havoc with the efficiency of trickle irrigation systems because it's pressurized in a linear system, and when you get a hole, that's where all the water goes. You greatly reduce what comes out of everything else. And I think another thing the department learned on the field trip is that trickle irrigation systems have a major wear item over time, and that is the actual drip tapes that are in the ground. So a trickle system that doesn't have a specific concept of controlling damage and doesn't have a system to where they have a certain interval in repairing and replacing, not repairing, but replacing subsurface tape, really is not living up to the greatest level of conservation that we're trying to achieve. I believe it's definitely going to be a concept that we need to discuss as we go forward. That basically takes us through our farm irrigation systems category. As I say, I think we have four definitions and systems that we need to discuss and see where they go. And at this point, I'll see if anybody has any questions. And I encourage you questions. If anybody has anything in this to help us create our discussion agenda for next time, please get into it at this point.
So Scott, this is Director Wachowski real quick, and I just want to reiterate the point you just made. We here as our staff listening to the conversation from you and everyone kind of help you, Scott, put together a plan for the next steps, our next meetings. And you went through many of the items on the list in a way that indicated there seemed to be acceptance that we had hit it right so far and don't need further discussion. So really need people to weigh in. The plan that will get back to you, Scott, will be for the things that we've heard from you and others that need further discussion, and we're going to take the other items kind of off the list for future discussion. That makes sense, Scott?
It makes total sense. And this is one of the things that I'm definitely trying to do today, is I'm trying to find places in this fairly large and complex program that where there's consensus and there's not disagreement. Let's get those things out of the way because they just make it more complex. And let's get to the places that we need to talk. And it sounds like we're getting there. So yes, I totally agree with your concept.
Great. So I'll stand down and let others weigh in.
Thank you, Chairman Riggins. I don't see any questions or comments in the chat box.
Okay, very good. Well, at that point then, we will, complete our discussion of category 2, and we will go over to category 3. Category 3 basically has remained identical in the 3rd management plan and the 4th management plan concept. The only difference is that now we have 12 points, and category 3 now allows there to be 4 points gathered in it. So every one of those 3.1 through 3.12, those are all very established and traditional practices and procedures of water conservation and irrigation. The one point that needs to be brought up here is, and it keys back into the discussion of structural farm practices, the category before. Category 3.1 is the only thing we have in this entire BMP that was approved in the third management plan that is the actual maintenance of a high-level efficiency conservation system. It's essential that these high-level systems be maintained. This is an excellent piece that got in here. It needed to get in here. And what it says is, sure, you can have your very high efficiency flood irrigation system, but we recognize that it's going to cost you a pretty good amount of money, and you're going to have to do it fairly often. In this particular example of BMP 3.1, basically 1/5 of a farm every year needs to be re-leveled. That is an enormous conservation efficiency benefit, and really shows the commitment to very high efficiency and very high conservation by giving points in a fashion like this that recognizes maintenance. I believe, and again, we'll have this discussion, and this is what I believe is a discussion point. I believe that in the discussion concerning the bottom 4 systems in the structural category, that in this category might be the place that we need to recognize what needs to happen with both drip or low pressure sprinkler systems and drip systems. There needs to be maintenance qualifiers that get put into this, because none of these things go out in the field and last forever. I mean, pretty much everybody here has experience with a car. Well, if you buy a new car and you drive it forever, sooner or later it won't run. And you can maintain it and keep it running for a very, very long time. But it must be maintained. And systems, for them to give the conservation that we need, they need to be maintained. In this category, that's really the only point how that laser touch-up point works with the structural category 2 point with near level and level, and the fact that we have an absence of maintenance points that go with drip and go with sprinkler. Other than that, I believe category 3, with its new number of points available with a higher point required system, is in good shape as it is. And so I'll stop with the caveats concerning the discussions of maintenance. I'll stop here and see if anybody has any things that they'd like to bring together on BMP category 3.
Hi, Scott. This is Natalie Mass. So maybe, I know we've heard this maintenance discussion from you a few times, and maybe something I'm hearing from you is that perhaps there's an opportunity here to create a dedicated maintenance category. Does that sound like something that would be worth discussing or pursuing?
In my thought at this point in time, the way the categories fit together, I see no reason to create another category when we already have the instance here of the maintenance requirement being in the irrigation water management category. I believe it would be simpler and less moving pieces to try to make work into something that we agree upon. by keeping it here and not creating a new category.
Sure. And I definitely hear you on the simplicity piece. I guess where my mind was going there is that if there were going to be a fair number of additional maintenance type BMPs, perhaps it could be better organized as a separate category, but yeah, maybe that could go either way.
I think, Natalie, that in these various points, the definitions are going to be very important. You'll notice in the existence of BMP 3.1, it doesn't only discuss the reestablishment of precision laser grades, it also says each year what you have to do. You know, that's pretty specific stuff. You know, and it's lived in here and it's been fine in here. I think through definitions, we can do the same thing with another two maintenance incentives and requirements with the other two systems, and how the point values work in conjunction in the two categories. Those are the things I think are going to be really the meat of our discussion on this next time.
Thank you, Chairman Riggins. We do have a couple of questions and comments here in the chat box. A commenter has noted, it sounds like for BMP Category 3, you want to encourage practices and place more value and work on guidance on the category.
Let's see. Let me see that. It sounds like for BMP category, you want to encourage practices, place more value, and work on guidance. The encouragement of practices, do we want to recognize that a installed structural practice, to keep it up at full efficiency, is a very expensive and very difficult practice? And if we are going to be able to have the BMPs reflect the work that people are doing to have very high efficiency, yes, that would encourage the practices of maintenance. Now, guidance, the guidance would be written into a definition. I don't quite understand exactly where work on guidance. This is a written program. It specifies certain quantifiable performance items, and it's a yes or no. You either do it or you don't. The next question I see there, does Category 3 encourage new technology adequately? As far as the irrigation of commodity crops in the Pinal AMA, when this particular list was put together, and indeed at this time, these were all the concepts that the parties concerned could identify. And as far as a new technology that is beginning to be used or is on the horizon out here to establish water efficiency and crop irrigation, I'm not quite sure I know what it is. I think we have all the technologies that we have discussed here. And it says here, the last one, are there standards or grades of checking for Cat 3 activities? And yes, indeed, there are. There are audit potentials within the BMP, and there is the necessity to evidence things that you have done. Maybe, and I don't know, I would have to look back at the list, maybe some work on, at least a look at it and see where we are. Where the standards or grades come from is is in an audit, for sure. And that's always been part of the BMP program. And if there's a desire to that a little bit more in one of these meetings, how those audits work, I think that would be very germane to the discussion.
Chairman Riggins, the same commenter has commented here, would established guidance and training for types of BMPs help to improve the use and overall efficiency of these BMPs?
Well, actually, we already have that. We have category 3.7 and category 3.8, and also category 3.9, which are all standards-based, education-based, observation-based, and helping for various producers and people who are irrigating on high efficiency systems to get training they may need and get a point for it. So the concept of having guidance and training in these BMPs is already in the overall framework of this BMP program.
So for that commenter, and is that you, Shane Leonard, the commenter, looking at the thread? Anyway, I guess the question based on Chairman Riggins' comment would be, is what we have for that training and guidance sufficient, or are we lacking in 3.7, 3.8, 3.9, et cetera? And maybe that's really the gist of your question. And I think those who are writing in the chat box, I think you can also unmute yourself and actually speak, and that might help expedite the conversation.
Okay,
Okay.
the commenter has mentioned that yes, 3.7 to 3.9 adequately covers it. Brian Hartman has commented here, are there points for GPS guidance systems? One example is listing or putting up furrows, more efficient.
Yes, one thing that there is thank you, Brian, that is something, and it really is strictly a change of technologies and a change of terminology. When this was written up, virtually all leveling systems were laser based. Now more and more of them are becoming GPS based. So, I would say that, anything that says laser probably needs to say laser / GPS. And as far as putting up furrows, we have that. We have angled rows, contour farming, and that concept is putting it in with a GPS or a laser system. I suppose some people might try to put in angled rows or contour farming without it, but I think they would find that they had a mess on their hands, because angled rows need to be pretty precise to work properly. Likewise, in that 3.4 of angled rows contour farming, I am sitting with Noah Hiscox, San Carlos board member and San Carlos farmer, and he pointed out that we needed one more inclusive concept in 3.4, and that is, not only is it angled rows and contour farming, but it's also angled rows and angled borders, because many people on fields flat level borders and put them at angles, and they have to do it with each crop. It's a very labor intensive and very expensive to do it all the time, but it does get you to a very high level of efficiency, because you can reduce the fall to whatever really you want to. So a couple of things here with I think it's good in this discussion to point out where a couple little bit more inclusive titles are here, but as far as GPS, just GPS / laser, that's basically doing the same job.
Sorry, Scott, I want to interrupt because I see a note from Kevin Rogers that he lost his audio. Did anyone else lose their audio, or is it just Kevin? If anyone's lost their audio, can you put that in the chat box? It might just be Kevin's system.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure everyone's hearing, or mostly everyone.
Kevin might,
Kevin will try to help you.
he might do well to log off now.
Yeah.
Seems like we're seeing notes that other people are hearing the audio, so probably can move forward, and Kevin will try to figure out how to get out. Yeah, okay.
Yay.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I want to make sure everyone's hearing.
Okay, are we good to continue?
Yes, we're good to continue.
Very good. I think that gets us discussed through category 3 and gives us some discussion points for our next meeting on aspects of category 3. And if there is no more comments that wish to come into it, I would like to move on to category 4.
Chairman Riggins, no questions or comments in the chat box.
Okay, excellent. Category 4 also is as far as the regulated community and the people I have spoken with, and I believe the department, moving with its existing existing points from a 3 to a 4 potential in that category and moving to a 12 from a 10 based system, I don't believe causes any trouble. And all of these particular agronomic management techniques are well established and traditional systems to get better efficiency and have better use of irrigation groundwater in growing crops. There is, it might be in the definitions. Let me see, I thought I was going to see that at the bottom. Let me see if I can see it in the BMP 4.8. Yes, it's not on the sheet, but one thing that was included in the third management plan, and it's not listed on here, but it's in the definitions, it also gave the concept of, as time moved forward, if someone came up with a substitute agronomic management practice that the BMP committee agreed, yes, you're right. That's a good one. Then that would be something that we would try to either get into the category, or if that was difficult doing because it was part of a management plan, give that individual who brought it up a point for it because the committee and the department agreed that yes, indeed, that is good. So this is one that if people come up with new concepts and they are good, valid, scientifically based concepts that are shown to work, it gives an opportunity to expand this with those concepts. So there was growth built into this and flexibility. I don't know, DWR probably could tell me, or that they may not even know. I don't know if anybody has ever come up with a substitute agronomic management practice. If they have, it's certainly been not many.
Scott, at least for the folks in this room from DWR, we're not aware of any. I would say that would be my supposition, but if you guys aren't aware of any, then it probably doesn't exist. And that shows that this entire program was thought through a great deal. There's a lot of meat in this, and it's hard to come up with further things to put on this thing because there's a lot here, and it really addresses the desire for this BMP program to have an incredibly high required conservation efficiency that is much higher by the design of the program than the base program. The base program, a person can put their allotment on the lousiest structures with the worst practices
and have least effective use of water possible. But in this practices, this management plan, BMPs, management to even be in it is required and audited, and something that all of us can be proud that we've got the entire regulated community willing to sign up into all these very expensive and difficult practices for the efficiency and the conservation that it'll bring. And so I believe I'm done with category 4, if there's no questions on it.
Chairman Riggins, there are no questions or comments.
So Scott, this is Director Rashofsky before we move on. And so we had talked, you and I had talked, and we had talked with some of the ag folks about the fact that in practice, the farmers are putting their water on the most lands, putting on the lands that create efficiency, yield, et cetera. Is this Appendix 4B or sum total of all the appendices something that accurately captures that positive practice? Or is there some way we can have a point category for that practice? I mean, I understand you had already said, and I agree with you, that the BMP program as a whole kind of incentivizes or allows you to do that, but is there a more direct way to capture that, the value of that practice?
The value of the practice of the BMP by its actual structural format, basically directing water of various allocations to be used on the most efficient and conservation structural units. Is that what you're saying, Director Johnson?
Yes.
I believe that when the third management plan BMP structure was adopted, that was an absolute knowledge that this is what it did. What it did is it created a requirement, not a allotment that could be figured out how it was used, but it required a much larger requirement to be put on water right users, that they had to have very, very high levels of efficiency in both structural improvements and practices and their actual techniques that they were using. And it was fully recognized at that time that obviously there are a large number of pieces of agricultural land with rights that for one reason or another over the decades have not really been improved. And one thing with the BMPs, those won't be irrigated. It establishes a very high level of conservation. Basically, you could look at it from the 180-degree opposite side of that. The base program assures that an operator can farm a very inefficient unit. Certainly can't do that with a BMP.
Thanks, Scott. And then I suppose we can move on then, unless others have
Okay.
some thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. I see on the agenda, I stated when we began this discussion of BMPs that I was combining all of A into one discussion. Well, I look at it and I do believe I've combined all of A and B into one discussion, because we've already discussed points accumulation and maximum and minimums and potential updates to categories. So I believe we handled all of the section 3 agenda items at this point. So if there's any further questions or anything on that anyone wishes to, opinions, questions, something that they feel is important to get into our agendas in the future, please jump in and get your line in the chat so we can address that.
Chairman Riggins, I'm not seeing anything at this time.
Okay, very good.
Sorry.
I see, yes, go ahead.
I spoke too soon. Shane Leonard has a comment about irrigation district issues. Shane, you are welcome to unmute yourself.
Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good deal. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I will attempt my best to be quick and to the point. One of the discussion points that was somewhat addressed in the original BMP program and might be addressed in subsequent BMP programs, point totals or categories, was the role of irrigation districts that serve as the primary means of delivery, as opposed to certain farming operations where they have their own wells or in some cases their own other supplies of water. For example, in RWCD's case, utilizing a capital improvement project budget to increase the efficiencies of wells, line systems, reuse systems, pump back systems, all to take that same molecule of water that's been produced to serve to a farming unit or a particular piece of property or the district as a whole, return waters that otherwise would have, I think, historically been categorized as tailwater, and then recirculating those and bringing those back for another round of deliveries. In essence, getting two opportunities to use the water instead of just one. These conversations may have occurred earlier, and my apologies if I'm rehashing some recent history, but is there a need or a want to look at under the...
Okay, now you're back. We lost a sentence or two.
Oh, long story short, is there a role for irrigation districts that are doing capital projects to improve their efficiencies to allow for more demand management, delivery management, recapturing of tailwater as an appendices in the new BMP program opportunities, depending on what the point spread might be? So, for example, RWCD spending dollars to put in a complete system recapture and reuse facility, things like that. Is there an opportunity for us to help address some of what we want to do with on-farm practices by using irrigation district monies, budgets, and processes?
Director Buchowski, would you like me to begin with that?
Yes, and then I have something to say, but go ahead, Chairman Riggins. You go first.
Shane, nice to hear from you. I haven't seen you in a long time. And thank you for that question, because those questions indeed were brought up significantly when we went through the third management plan BMPs. If you'll notice, are actually 4 different category 3 water management techniques that truly are reflective of things that an irrigation district can do. They all are things that a couple of them can be done with private consultants, but other ones really depend on the district to be able to deliver certain amounts of flexibility and efficiency to make them work. One of the, and indeed in RWCD, when I used to farm in RWCD, you know, there were times that I would have an irrigation head go from 100 inches to 300 inches and back to 100 inches about every 3 or 4 hours. And RWCD certainly is not that way anymore. The great deal has been put into making the efficiencies and the reliabilities much higher. One concept in the BMPs is, again, when you go across the board and see how things affect a BMP participant, well, an irrigation district that gets all of its structural efficiencies and concepts in order definitely is a benefit, and there's much less loss of water because of that. But then by the same token, if a person has an irrigation well on the corner of a field pumping out of a metal pipe into a concrete ditch, that's an enormous efficiency also. There's nothing lost at all. So as you get around what the district can do, this program is designed for the things that the individual farmer producer commits to that they will make happen. And it definitely, as we've seen, we have 4 interrelated points where the irrigation district can help the person who is subject to audit, the person that's made the commitment to achieve these high efficiencies, to where the irrigation district's programs and efficiencies can help them. One note that would be important to see in this, you mentioned systems of reclaiming water and getting it back in the system to where somebody can use it again. Well, by all means, that is a wonderful structural practice for the irrigation district, and it really is good for everyone. But by the same token, because of other reasons, in the structural farm practices on a level basin system, there is a requirement that no water leaves the field. So to get that structural practice, you can't have any tailwater leave the field. Now, there are lesser degree structural practices. It would be 2.3, which is uniform slope systems with tailwater reuse, or uniform slope systems within an irrigation district that captures and redistributes return flows. That's recognized that a person can have a uniform slope system, get extra points because of what the irrigation district is doing. But to get more points than that, by definition in the program, in level basin fields, no water can leave the field. So I do believe that the original practices and the way they interweave with each other very much caught the benefits that well-run and efficient irrigation districts can do for the BMP obligator, the one who signed himself into it. But again, the biggest part of this is what they do to achieve conservation. And I don't know how I've answered your question, but I would like you to comment back if you would.
I might wait until I believe the director said he had a comment as well, and then I do have a couple of quick replies. Nothing argumentative, obviously.
Okay. All right, Director
So
Bukowski.
this is the director, and my view is yes. We should capture the value added that the irrigation districts can put into this program. And I guess, Shane, I would ask you and the other irrigation district managers, or those who know a lot more about what irrigation districts do, to kind of review Appendix 2 and 3 that Scott referred to see if we are accurately capturing the value added that the districts can do for the individual farmers. And if we're not, it would be great to hear some specific actions and points attached to those actions that this committee might discuss to add in the right place in the right appendix.
Thank you very much. Certainly I can provide those comments in writing to Mr. Riggins and director, to yourself and to staff, because that would save a lot of time, and then you've actually got it for review. I can think of 2 relevant examples, at least on behalf of RWCD, and one of those has to deal with our well field. And in general terms, RWCD has spent significant dollars in our universe. So over the last 5 years, approaching $7.5 to $10 million, providing updated above ground well equipment, motors, combo starters, transformers, things like that to provide a uniformity of supply and an interchangeability of that equipment so that our farmers and our growers have a dependable flow of water and we aren't suffering under variable constant flows. As Mr. Riggins indicated years ago, there was issues related to uniformity of supply, when you were getting it, how you were getting it, and the consistency with which you were receiving it. And so, again, as a generalized example, where an irrigation district is taking significant resources that have been provided by the landowners and the taxpayers in the district as a capital item, whether there is a place for the recognition of that capital investment being used to provide better efficiencies of the production of water to those same farming units. That's an example. The second is RWCD having lands that were bisected, for example, by freeways, where it wasn't going to be acceptable that we used, traditional gravity-fed systems in order to get the water there because you simply couldn't do it. And so what we did in those cases were took those lands and instead of relocating a well in approximately the same location or constructing a lot of different facilities, we ended up going to demand management using variable frequency drive motors and signaling from the farming units to us about the need for water and actually bringing demand management to almost an immediate. So if they needed water, being able to get a hold of us and produce that, and then being able to turn it off subsequently almost as soon as they were done with it. There's other examples related to undergrounding systems, reuse systems. One of the things as a 30,000 foot level was the mix of water that might be provided to landowners, farmers, and irrigation districts. So is there an opportunity to recognize that if districts have long-term agreements for the storage of CAP water, so we aren't producing groundwater as a matter of that year or the next couple of years, is there an opportunity to provide some consideration there? So as an example of where I think we can integrate what an irrigation district is doing at a macro level on their operations to what the farming unit is doing on their somewhat micro level related to what they can do. Because arguably, a lot of times the farming folks and those farming units are represented on those irrigation districts and have that interchangeability. So that kind of high level discussion, and if it's a benefit, I could certainly provide some of those additional comments and scenarios in writing.
May I respond to that? Okay, am I on?
Yes, Scott, we can hear you.
Oh, very good. Shane, I agree with the concepts that you have put forward. Beyond the shadow of a doubt, a non-variable irrigation source is essential to achieve high efficiency. Systems that have ups and downs all the times, regardless of what a person has in the field, it's very, very hard to be efficient. And a recognition of the monies that go into that would be very beneficial to recognize in a BMP line item. That being said, the argument can be made also, well, somebody that has private wells has the most uniform water system that is available. It's the same 24/7 all the time. So I think the challenge is not that what you're saying is not absolutely justifiable, but I think the challenge is how to work it out into the BMP system. And in that, I would suggest that you definitely put these ideas down in writing, and I would love them to go to the director and myself, and we in the next meeting or two definitely agendize that and have a full discussion on it.
I will get that done, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your points and your comments.
And Riggins, we have Brian Hartman in the chat. Brian has commented, does the U of A Extension or Ag College have an active computer-based modeling program referencing BMP 3.12? It was useful as a tool for scheduling irrigation in the past.
I'm trying to get back on my sheet. Here we are. Yes, and Brian, thank you very much for that, because there are more models than just the one we have here. This was an EG, for example, as met, but there are other ones, and I think it would be incumbent on us to get more examples down of things that work in this. I know that there are some private consultant-based weather services that are for hire that also probably would fit into this point. So yes, I think getting some more examples in that to flesh that out a little bit more, I think that is an excellent idea.
Chairman Riggins, this is the director, and I'll just say I agree with what you just said. We would certainly like the advisory committee to, I guess I'll use the word, kind of certify or agree with the accuracy or the value of each one of those models, so that we could consider having those in a list of kind of approved models, so to speak. And that's something we would need the help of this committee in terms of their expertise to confirm that those models work as they're intended, and they are that useful tool as described in the comment.
And I thank you for that comment, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that for this to be a reliable practice, it absolutely needs to be quantified in a way that leads to confidence. And so I agree. In definitions, we need to have it in such a way that we just don't leave it open to anything that may not be effective.
If I can speak, this is Ed Martin with the University of Arizona.
Yes, please go ahead, Ed.
Sure, and I just want to say that we'd be happy to work with the group in developing that list and work with the folks at ALARC as well, and Kevin Bronson, and come up with some alternatives and different things, and look at the applicability of those models. So we would be happy to work with anyone who wants to work with us on that, and we can go through and look at each one and see which ones work best for Arizona and for our growers. So just let me know.
If I may, thank you ever so much for that. I think that would be excellent to get that to where we can have an agendized item on that and discuss it. Working up some of those concepts so we could get to that point would be an excellent help. I would suggest that Brian Hartman, I'm sure you know him personally, and he is a member of this BMP committee. If some effort can be made into this to get it on the agenda, because remember the department is asking for a fairly short timeline on this. So the things that we want to do, we need to get them out and onto the agenda as quickly as we can. But I would certainly welcome that input myself.
Sure, I'll work with Brian, and as I said, I'll bring in the folks at ALARC, and we'll try to come up with something fairly quick for you all.
Okay, thank you very much.
We'll
go ahead, Director Bachowski.
Just want to ask, when you all, Ed and Brian have an idea of when that might be ready for consideration by the committee? Could you let us know if we help Scott with agendizing all the agendas? As one of the things we facilitate for Scott. So we'll leave it up to you to let us know when you think that's ready for discussion by Scott and the whole committee.
We certainly will, and we'll also probably pass our ideas on to you for your review too before we push anything forward to make sure that we're all on the same page. So.
Okay. Any other questions concerning the technical BMP worksheet and practices and points?
Riggins, I'm not seeing anything additional in the chat box.
Okay, very good. In that case, I believe that our next agenda item is discussion of statutory requirements. And I believe I probably will lead into this. Do we have a copy for the screen of 45-567.02G? Well, okay, yeah, we'll do G. We'll do G first. That's the one I think that we need to talk to first. The wordage on this, we have a little paraphrasing, but I believe that the paraphrasing under this condition is satisfactory for us to use this as the statute. The biggest difference is where we have the italicized, the base program at the end. The statute actually references the statute that is the base program. But I think the final sentence reflects the statute adequately to use it to discuss. In the reading of 45-467.02, I don't believe that anybody within the regulated community nor the department really has any potential disagreement on anything other than the last sentence. And that last sentence is that the program, which is the Ag BMP program, shall be designed to achieve conservation that is at least equivalent to that required under the base program. Well, we have a difficulty. We've had a line that we have drawn off to that I believe has totally confused the statute. And I don't portend or imagine that we will get agreement on this today, but it is going to be a large part of the discussion, I am sure, as we go forward. The BMP program has been approached by the department as a program that uses more water than the base program. Well, there's two problems with that concept. First of all, the statute doesn't speak to volumes of water. It speaks to conservation. It speaks to the prevention of the wasteful use of a resource. It speaks to sustainability in the use of water. The program, the BMPs, is absolutely designed from the top down to conform to that last sentence. There is not a thing about the BMP program that is not superior in conservation to the base program. The utilization of waters from various allotments in one place is not a detriment. Just because that limited allotment is used in one place doesn't mean that the BMP program has a problem with using more water. Because the thing that isn't being tracked is the transfer of flex credits that are possible in the base program totally allows the same thing. It allows as much water to go to certain farms as people can make use of flex credits to do. We're in a situation where we're still discussing that we might have a problem with the BMP program because some farms use more than their allotment. What we don't remember is that when the third management practice, the BMP program, was adopted and put into statute, it was fully recognized that's exactly what it would do. Because that meant that the allotment had to be steered off of the inefficient places and taken to the efficient places. Conservation, efficiency, best use of agricultural waters is the reason why that happens. And the second point is, in our evolving situation with a diminishment, an absolutely unequivocal diminishment of CAP volumes over this decade, there will be nothing but a plethora of flex credits to take water anywhere it is wanted to go, because the amount of wet water will be far less than the allotments on the irrigation grandfather rights. The base program maximizes the potential and the reality of using scarce resources that we are trying to conserve on the very worst, least efficient lands. Not that it will be done, but it maximizes the potential. The BMP program eliminates the potential. That's a lot to be said over the definition of a single sentence. But the fact of it is that describes how this sentence fits into the work that we need to do. And I will turn that over to anyone that is in the meeting here that'd like to have a comment on it.
So Scott, this is Director Bishotsky, and I was pausing to see if there were any comments, but I just want to say that certainly in the fourth management plan discussion, we, the department, thought that that last sentence put a requirement on us to look at some way to calculate, like some calculation of equivalency. And I think you know, and some others know, that we're working with you and a couple of other ag representatives and staff to see if there is a legitimate way to do such a calculation. And we know there are some difficulties with that, but we haven't really worked completely through that process. So I just want to make that aware to everybody that we are working on that, and we'll see if that process bears any fruit in terms of a calculus that actually can make some sense because of some of the limitations on data and other things that we've talked about in that process. But I'd also like to go back one slide. And this is part of the challenge for me, for our department. You have the statute we just looked at, and then you have this statute that talks about plans including a mandatory conservation program designed to achieve reductions in withdrawals of groundwater. There's no, notwithstanding ARS 45563A, lead-in to the statute we just described, the G statute. So are these statutes, how do these two statutes fit together? Does the G statute override this statute on the screen? Do we have to find a way to make this work in concert? And certainly in the fourth management plan process, we thought this statute required us to do more than, and was maybe the genesis of, the additional points and the changes to the BMP program we proposed. And again, for everybody's common knowledge and full disclosure, we know that many of the agricultural stakeholders who've been talking with us and have commented to us don't agree with Steve Devereux's view, but I think that I'm trying to share with you our conundrum to some degree. We've got statutes that may arguably conflict with each other, or they might not conflict with each other. More importantly, we may have to find a way to make them work together, and I think that is, for me, the conversation we need to have with this committee.
And thank you very much for that. I actually was not going to get into 45-563A today, but I am actually very, very glad that you brought it up, and I thank you for the interpretation and the various difficulties potentially in reconciliation. But I would suggest that we really haven't together been reading this correctly, because we underline reductions and withdrawals of groundwater as if that is what this statute is all about. It's not. This statute isn't about that at all. What this statute says specifically, 45-563, what it says is the director shall develop a management plan in all the initial management areas for each of the 5 management periods. Well, this is a primary statute that describes what is going to happen in statutes 45-564, 45-565, 6, 7, and 8, which are the first, second, and third management plans. So this statute says we're going to have 5 management plans. Then we have 5 statutes behind it that state what the conservation requirements are going to be in each management plan. This goes on to say the plans shall include a continuing mandatory conservation program. And indeed, each one of those statutes, in their varying applications to the management plan that was passed for each of the management periods, has a differing menu of statutory conservation options that the department can select. Indeed, the 4th management plan, the department reduced the withdrawals of groundwater by decreasing higher level water right amounts by a predetermined in the statute percentage to result in a lesser groundwater volume for various rights in the AMA. So indeed, in the 4th management plan, there has been an achievement of reductions in withdrawals of groundwater due to the management plan mandatory conservation programs. It has happened as is spelled out in statute. One of the things that statute does not say, it doesn't say the plan shall include a continuing mandatory groundwater reduction program. What it says, it will have a continuing mandatory conservation program. And those programs, as enumerated in the following 5 statutes, have been utilized all along the way to reduce the amount of groundwater as enumerated in the statutes. Nowhere does 45-563A have carte blanche on its own to simply reduce withdrawals of groundwater for agriculture. The only reductions are through mandatory conservation programs that are already enumerated within the statutes that describe the management plans as they are theorized how they may eventually be promulgated. So I would say that there truly is no disagreement whatsoever between 45-563A and, well, you'd think I'd just have the number, 45-567.02G. I think they work together perfectly because they talk about conservation and they talk about existing statutory rules on how those conservation programs are going to be modified and changed over the various plans, from the first management plan to the fifth. So I would suggest, as in our discussions, that there certainly is a large part of the regulated public that does not see 563A as a basis on its own, that further reductions in withdrawals of groundwater need to be found, but yet qualified by the way it's already in existing statute. And thank you very much.
So Scott, I'll share with you and everybody what I'm about to say, having not discussed this with anyone in this room, my lawyer, my staff. But it seems to me, much like we did in the fourth management plan, we might not necessarily need to get to a place where we can resolve, or whether we even need to resolve, maybe differing views over GA and 568G. And I say that in the context of, in the fourth management plan, we added some meat to the BMP program. What we've talked about so far today is adding some meat to the BMP program. And we still are yet to talk with you all about kind of the idea of the tiered system. But if we get to a place where we are adding beef to the program, adding good things to the program that are technically sound, that make sense, that are implementable by the farmers, I don't know that we even need to reach an agreement on defining how 563 or 567, whatever, work together, because we've accomplished the bigger goal of what the management plans and what the groundwater code seems to be telling us to do from the higher level. So I'll just throw that out there for people to think about. I'm far enough away from my attorney that he can't kick me having said that. But I think we don't necessarily, in my mind, need to have, I think this can be mooted out if we can get to a point of adding some action items and point structures and other things to the existing BMP program. So I'll just throw that out for everyone to think about as we move forward in discussing those changes and additions that we started talking about earlier this morning. And I'd love to hear anyone's reaction to what I just said, if people are willing to do so at this point in time.
Director Buchowski, I have a short comment. I would like to say, after your statement, that as you did when we were going through larger levels of disagreement before things had been agreed upon and narrowed, some wise and inclusive and desiring to find common solutions, comments and discussions on your part were very, very important to get where we are today. And I fully agree with your statement. There's not a need to absolutely plumb down to the bottom of every technicality if through good conservation work, making things better in fashions that people can do and are systems that benefit the water system as a whole, if we can go in that direction, I 100% agree with you, and I applaud your making that statement at the time you did.
So we received a message, a comment here that says, I think the measure of conservation is to see whether BMP participants can achieve the farm's required efficiency, 70% or 80% or whatever it is, as if it was in the base program. The measure is water delivered to the fields and used versus expected demand based on crops grown.
And then we have one other comment from Chris Udall, and it was about the prior conversation about the bigger picture, pursuing changes to the BMP program. I believe that's the context, and it says it's worth pursuing. So as to the prior comment about achieving the farm's efficiency, we'll think about that some more before commenting.
If I might, this is Shane Leonard.
Go ahead, Shane. I'm seeing now another comment that came in before we read that efficiency comment.
Oh, no worries. With regards to the conversation about whether or not, or the discussion point, apparently or not apparently, conflicting sections of statute related to the management plans need to be addressed as a part of the BMP program. I agree with you, and I believe that's where the process is headed, that we don't have to resolve every apparent inconsistency associated with what the management plans are intended to do, what's in the management plans, and their overall effectiveness as far as achieving safe yield or not. So for what it's worth, for my participation and RWC's participation with the management plans, I believe, and I know my growers and my board would believe, that it's absolutely necessary to ensure that the BMP program is successful, that we do it in a way that makes sense for all involved without, and I'll use this as lightly as I can, needlessly getting into areas of conflict that I don't think we would necessarily resolve before it's the BMPs need to be solidified and put into the 5th management plan. So for what it's worth, it's certainly something to discuss, but I don't know that that potential conflict is something that needs to be rectified right now. I think the goal of the BMP program, I think the efforts of you, Director, and Mr. Riggins are such that we can get this done without the need to try and fix that if it actually needs to be fixed, and save it for a later date.
So Shane, I'll just say thanks for that comment and point out one thing. You talked about safe yield as the goal, and certainly for your district, RWCD, it's in the Phoenix AMA, that is the safe yield goal. But we all, I think, know that safe yield's not the goal in the Pinal AMA, and I just bring that up because that was an important point for Pinal stakeholders to the department in relation to the 4th management plan, in comments they made and in their request for rehearing and review. So I just want to point out that we understand the difference in the goals between the safe yield AMAs and Pinal AMA, and are not really looking at any of this in a way that says, do the BMPs, you know, is the BMP program unsuccessful because you're not achieving the management goals? I don't think that's what the statutes say at all, in any way, shape, or form. Achieving a safe yield goal is dependent on so many other factors that have nothing to do with the BMP program, or even the base program to some degree. So I just want to make sure we recognize, and I state proactively, that we're not looking at the Pinal AMA in a way that it needs to achieve safe yield.
I very much appreciate that clarification, and for the record, did not mean to intimate that we needed or we're asking Pinal County certainly to do that, but your words are much better than mine at this point with regards to the overall goal associated with this particular process. I don't think anybody wants to relive the glory days of the second and the third management plan on the arguments over what goals should be and the 14 different definitions of what safe yield or not achieving safe yield meant for overall areas. So appreciate that clarification. Thank you very much.
Scott Riggins, I would also like to, again, thank the director for pointing out that concept, because it is very important to the LAMA regulated community that we do indeed, even though we're all in a BMP program together in the AMAs, the Pinal AMA truly has a different goal. And you have stated that right here in the meeting, and I appreciate you for bringing it up.
Thank you, Chairman Riggins. We have a comment in the chat box. A commenter has mentioned, can it be put in a way that the volume of produce grown is maximized with efficient water use? An inefficient user will grow less with the same volume of water versus an efficient water conservative user.
Well, that is the general concept behind conservation. Generally, a system that is not highly efficient and made for uniform penetration, you will have areas in field units that are either overwatered or underwatered. And that's what getting uniform penetration and uniform application leads to. And so I agree with the statement made by the commenter.
So perhaps, Chairman Riggins, we're running toward the end of the meeting. I'd like to have us skip to the next steps, potential topics to address slide, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Please continue with that.
Go to the next one. So clearly we talked about some action items. We will synthesize some of that discussion for you, Chairman, and get you a list of what we think those action items are. And I don't know if you want, Chairman, to discuss any of these other potential items. I think on the right-hand side, this is what the whole conversation was about today, and we have clearly more work to do. On the left-hand side, it talks about additional background and history, maybe a field trip, expanding the issues list. We already talked today about scheduling meetings in concert with the 5th management plan timeline. So I don't know, Chairman, how would you like to proceed?
My thought is that I believe we've had a very successful agenda and meeting today, because I believe we've thinned a lot of issues out of our discussion because there's consensus and agreement with them. And using the basis of this meeting, I think we should try to agendize as much as possible those items that were brought up that need further discussion.
So, Chairman, we will do that with you. We will put together that list. Our folks have been taking notes, and we will reach out to you and work on starting to put together that next agenda and talk with you about a potential meeting date.
That sounds excellent. I look forward to working with the department to help create that agenda.
So, Chairman Riggins, do you have anything else for today?
Are we wanting to set a next meeting time? Or, or are we just putting it out more or less at a month and wait till you folks know your time a month from now a little bit better and maybe set that time 15 days or so from now, which would be more valuable to the department?
So roughly a month sounds good, and putting out kind of a save the date or an actual date a couple of weeks ahead of time, I think works well. That'll give us time for us to do our work, to confer with you, and to make sure that potential meeting dates work for at least you, as many of the members as possible, and us. But yeah, about a month sounds right.
Okay. Well, that, I believe that sounds fine with me, and if we, if the other people that are participating agree with that, I think we're all in good shape.
Yeah, and thank you to all who have participated today as well.
Does the department have any further discussion or comments they would like to make at this time?
No, we don't.
Is there anyone who are participants or board member or committee members that would like to make any comments, questions at this time? It appears there's not. In that case then, as chair of the BMP committee, I will forward that we will adjourn the meeting at this time. And thank everyone and look forward to our next one.